Briar Hollow was where the world sent what it wanted to forget. Orphans, runaways, widows with no family to claim them, wolves too broken, too scarred, or too shameful to belong anywhere else. The village sat at the edge of the kingdom of Valdrin like a wound the realm refused to acknowledge, surviving on scraps and stubbornness, and the kind of hope that had learned to expect nothing. Nerissa had lived there for 3 years, long enough to know every hungry child by name, long enough to understand that no one was coming to save them, long enough to stop waiting. She was hanging laundry behind the orphan house when the beast appeared. It came from the tree line like a nightmare given form. Massive, black-furred, with eyes like molten amber and claws that gouged the earth with every step. The children screamed. Tiny bodies scattered in terror, some too frozen to run, just standing there crying as the creature prowled closer. Nerissa didn't think. She grabbed a stone from the ground and hurled it with every ounce of strength she possessed. It struck the beast square between the eyes. The creature stopped. Every villager who witnessed it stopped breathing. And then, impossibly, the beast picked up the stone in its massive jaws, walked calmly toward Nerissa, and dropped it at her feet. It sat down, tilted its enormous head, and waited. Before she could process what had happened, hoofbeats thundered through the village. A company of royal soldiers parted around a single rider, the Alpha King of Valdrin. Karis Vanther was not beautiful the way ballads described kings. He was beautiful the way a blade was beautiful. Cold, precise, are designed for a single purpose. His pale eyes swept over the village, over the trembling children, over the beast sitting docile at Nerissa's feet. "It seems," he said, his voice empty of warmth, "my beast has chosen you." He offered her a bargain that day. Protection. Purpose. A position in his castle caring for something precious. Food and supplies sent to Briar Hollow's children for as long as she served. But there were conditions. She would never ask about what she could not see. She would never enter the East Tower. She would never attempt to know him beyond what duty required. And above all else, she must never make him care for her. "It would be dangerous," he said, though his eyes betrayed nothing. "For both of us." Nerissa accepted. What choice did she have? What choice did any of them have? But, as the king's carriage carried her away from everything she knew, one question burned in her mind. Why would the most powerful alpha in the realm bind himself to a woman the world had already discarded? Neither of them understood what that single throne stone had truly set in motion. The morning had begun like every other morning in Briar Hollow, with hunger. Nerissa woke before dawn, as she always did, to the sound of small coughs echoing through thin walls. The orphan house was drafty despite her best efforts, the gaps between boards stuffed with rags and dried moss that did little against the creeping autumn chill. 12 children, 12 mouths, and barely enough bread for 6. She moved quietly through the cramped sleeping quarters, adjusting threadbare blankets, pressing her palm to foreheads to check for fever. Little Oswin had been coughing for 3 days now. She didn't have the herbs to treat him properly. She didn't have anything proper. Not medicine, not food, not hope that tomorrow would be different from today. But the children didn't need to see her worry. They saw enough hardship without watching their caretaker crumble. "Nerissa?" A small voice, barely awake. She turned to find Brecken sitting up in his cot. All 6 years of him with tangled brown hair and eyes too old for his face. He'd arrived at Briar Hollow 8 months ago, found wandering the forest road with no memory of where he came from or who had left him there. "Go back to sleep, little wolf," she whispered. "It's too early." "I heard something outside, in the trees. Probably just a deer. The forest is full of them." But Brecken shook his head, small brow furrowed. "It didn't sound like a deer. It sounded big." Nerissa forced a smile she didn't feel. Then I'll go chase the big thing away. That's what I do, remember? I chase away the scary things. She left him with a gentle touch to his hair and stepped outside into the gray, pre-dawn light. The village of Briar Hollow consisted of perhaps 30 structures, most of them leaning against each other like drunks after a long night. The orphan house was the largest, which wasn't saying much. A converted barn that had seen better centuries. Around it, the other residents were beginning to stir. Old Marta hobbling toward the well. Fenwick checking his rabbit traps with the resigned expression of a man who expected to find them empty. No one looked at Nerissa directly. They never did. She'd grown accustomed to it. The way conversations paused when she approached. The way mothers pulled their children a little closer when she passed. She knew what they whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. Cursed. Unclaimable. Something wrong with that one. They weren't entirely wrong. 3 years ago, Nerissa had arrived in Briar Hollow with nothing but the clothes on her back and a darkness in her eyes that made even the desperate keep their distance. She never spoke about where she came from, never explained the scar that ran from her collarbone to her shoulder like a jagged river frozen in flesh, a wound from the night everything had shattered, though she couldn't remember receiving it. But she had a gift. That much they couldn't deny. Animals trusted her. Wounded deer would let her approach. Feral dogs became gentle at her touch. Even the wolves that hunted these forests, real wolves, not shifters, gave her a wide berth. Not from fear, but something like respect. It was why she'd ended up caring for the children no one else wanted. Who better to tend broken things than a broken woman who could soothe savage beasts? She was hanging laundry behind the orphan house. Truly, she was always hanging laundry. Children generated filth at an astonishing rate when the screaming started. High, piercing, pure terror. Nerissa dropped the wet shirt in her hands and ran. She rounded the corner of the building and her blood turned to ice. The creature was enormous. It stood at the edge of the tree line like a shadow that had learned to breathe. Easily the size of a draft horse, but built like something from a nightmare. Black fur so dark it seemed to drink the light. Amber eyes that burned with intelligence far beyond any ordinary animal. Claws that left furrows in the earth with every slow, deliberate step. And it was walking toward the children. Lyra, only 4 years old, stood frozen directly in its path. Too terrified to run, too small to survive if those claws reached her. Nerissa didn't think, didn't calculate odds or consider consequences. She spotted a stone on the ground, fist-sized, sharp-edged, and her hand closed around it. She threw. The stone flew true, striking the beast between its massive eyes with a crack that echoed across the clearing. The creature stopped. For one eternal moment, nothing moved. The children held their breath. The villagers who had emerged to see what was happening stood frozen in shock. Then the beast shook its great head, not in pain, but something almost like surprise. Those amber eyes fixed on Nerissa with unsettling focus. It lowered its muzzle, picked up the fallen stone in its jaws with impossible delicacy, and walked toward her. Nerissa's legs refused to run. Some instinct deeper than fear told her that running would be useless. This creature could chase down anything it wanted. It stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the wild forest musk of its fur, feel the heat radiating from its body, and it dropped the stone at her feet. Then it sat down, tilted its enormous head, and waited. By the gods, someone whispered behind her. Before Nerissa could respond, before she could even begin to process what had happened, a sound reached her ears. Distant at first, then growing louder. Hoofbeats, many of them, and approaching fast. The villagers began to scatter, recognizing the thunder of royal cavalry. Nerissa remained rooted in place, the beast still sitting calmly at her feet, as a company of soldiers crested the hill and descended upon Briar Hollow. They parted around a single rider. And Nerissa understood, with sudden crystalline clarity that her life had just changed forever. The Alpha King had come. He dismounted without assistance, waving away the soldier who moved to help him with a gesture so slight it was almost invisible. Everything about him was like that. Controlled, minimal, nothing wasted. Karis Vanthor, Alpha King of Valdrin. Nerissa had never seen him before. Few commoners had. He ruled from the distant capital, a figure more myth than man, he known only through proclamations read in village squares and taxes collected by faceless officials. The myths had not prepared her for the reality. He was tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen, with shoulders that spoke of a warrior's strength despite the elegant cut of his traveling clothes. His hair was dark, almost black, swept back from a face that seemed carved from pale marble. High cheekbones, a jaw like cut stone, lips pressed into a line that suggested they had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Gray, not the soft gray of morning mist, but the hard gray of winter storms, of steel, of something ancient and cold and completely unreadable. He walked toward her without hurry, his soldiers falling into formation behind him. The villagers had retreated to doorways and windows, watching with the wary eyes of prey animals who had spotted a predator. The beast, still sitting at Nerissa's feet, made a low sound in its throat. Not a growl. Something almost like greeting. The king stopped 3 paces away. His gaze moved from the beast to Nerissa, lingered there, and then returned to the beast. Vorn, he said. Just the name. No command, no inflection. The beast's tail swept the ground once, but it didn't move from Nerissa's side. Something flickered in those storm-colored eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or something deeper. He's never done that before, the king said quietly. Stayed with someone. Answered to anyone but me. Nerissa found her voice, though it came out rougher than intended. I struck him. With a stone. He was scaring the children. She expected anger, expected soldiers to seize her, drag her away for the crime of attacking the king's personal beast. What she got instead was silence. The king studied her. Not the way men usually looked at women, assessing beauty, calculating worth. This was something else. Something that made her feel like a manuscript being read in a language she didn't know she was written in. You struck Vorn, he repeated. A beast that has killed trained warriors with a single swipe of his claws, and you threw a stone at him. He was going to hurt the children. Was he? The king's head tilted slightly. Or were you simply the first person brave enough, or foolish enough, to stand in his way? Nerissa had no answer for that. The king turned to survey the village, the crumbling buildings, the thin faces peering from windows. In the general air of neglect and desperation that clung to Briar Hollow like a second skin. You care for the orphans here? He said. It wasn't a question. Someone has to. There's no profit in it, no status, no reward. There are children. That's reward enough. Again, that flicker in his eyes. Again, that sense of being read. He turned back to her, and when he spoke, his voice was flat, businesslike, as if discussing a trade agreement rather than her life. Vorn is dying. The words hung in the air. Nerissa glanced down at the massive beast, at his gleaming fur and bright eyes, and saw nothing that suggested illness. He doesn't look... It's not a sickness of the body. The king's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He is bound to me, has been since I was a child. When one suffers, the other suffers. When one weakens. He didn't finish the sentence. I have sought healers, witches, scholars. None have been able to help. Then why are you telling me this? Because Vorn has never chosen anyone before. Never stayed with anyone. Never shown interest in anyone. And then a village woman throws a stone at his head, and he brings it back like a pup playing fetch. Nerissa felt the weight of what he wasn't saying pressing down on her. You think I can help him? I think you're the first possibility I've encountered in 5 years of searching. The king stepped closer, and she felt the cold radiating from him, not metaphorical cold, but actual physical chill, as if winter lived beneath his skin. Come to the castle, care for Vorn. I will ensure this village receives supplies, food, medicine, clothing, building materials. Enough to see these children through 100 winters. Her pulse spiked. It was everything Briar Hollow needed, everything she'd prayed for and never received. And what do you want in return? Your presence. Your gift. Whatever it is that made Vorn choose you. Your complete discretion. His eyes held hers, unblinking. And your compliance with 3 conditions. Which are: you will never ask about what you cannot see. There are parts of the castle, parts of my life, that are not your concern. You will accept that? Nerissa nodded slowly. And the second? You will never enter the East Tower. For any reason, under any circumstance. A cold finger traced down her spine, but she nodded again. The third? The king was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, almost reluctant. You will not attempt to know me. And we will not share meals. We will not share conversation beyond what duty requires. We will not... He paused, something shifting behind those pale gray eyes. You will remain a servant. Nothing more. You're telling me to keep my distance. I'm telling you to stay alive. He turned away, signaling to his soldiers. Whatever happens, whatever you feel or think you feel as time passes, do not make me care for you. Nerissa's brow furrowed. Why would that? Because it would be dangerous. He cut her off, already walking toward his horse. For both of us. She should refuse. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong here, that she was walking into a trap she couldn't see, that a king who spoke of caring as dangerous was not a man to trust. But then she looked at Briar Hollow, at the hungry children watching from windows, at old Marta, who had given her last blanket to little Oswin, at a village that would not survive another winter without help. I accept, she called after him. The king paused, one hand on his horse's flank. He didn't turn around. Then gather what you need. We leave within the hour. As his soldiers began preparing for departure, Nerissa looked down at Vorn. The beast gazed up at her with those amber eyes, and for just a moment she could have sworn she saw something there. Understanding. Warning. And beneath it all, the faintest glimmer of hope. The castle was nothing like Nerissa had imagined. She'd expected grandeur, the kind of cold opulence that royalty seemed to favor. Marble floors and gilded ceilings and servants who looked through you rather than at you. What she found instead was something older, stranger, a fortress that seemed to have grown from the mountain itself rather than been built upon it. Stone walls the color of thunderclouds, narrow windows that let in light, but revealed nothing of the rooms within. Towers that climbed toward the sky like claws reaching for something they could never grasp. And silence. Everywhere. Silence. Your chambers are in the west wing, the steward informed her. A thin man named Aldous who moved with the efficient grace of someone who had spent decades navigating palace politics. You'll find them comfortable, if modest. His Majesty was quite specific about your accommodations. Modest is fine, Nerissa said. Modest was more than she'd had in years. Aldous led her through corridors that seemed to twist and turn without logic, past doors that remained firmly closed, past servants who bowed to the steward but barely glanced at her. Vorn padded silently at her side, his massive body somehow fitting through passages that seemed too narrow for him. Meals will be brought to your room, Aldous continued. You are not to eat in the Great Hall. You are not to wander unescorted. You are not to wander unescorted. You are not to speak with other members of the household unless spoken to first. His Majesty mentioned something about an east tower. Aldis's steps faltered, almost imperceptibly. You are never to go there. That instruction supersedes all others. What's in the east tower? The steward stopped walking. When he turned to face her, his expression had shifted from professional neutrality to something harder, more guarded. Questions like that, he said quietly, are how people disappear from this castle, girl. I learned to swallow your curiosity, or it will swallow you. He resumed walking before she could respond. Her chambers were, as promised, modest: a bed with clean linens, a small fireplace, a window overlooking the forested valley below. After the orphan house, it felt like a palace unto itself. A proper palace, she corrected herself, a smaller palace within the larger one. Vorn settled himself on the floor beside the bed, taking up most of the available space. His amber eyes tracked her as she explored the room, watching without judgment. So, Nerissa said aloud, sitting on the edge of the bed, you're dying, and I'm supposed to save you. Any suggestions on how to do that? The beast's tail thumped once against the stone floor. Helpful. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find a young woman carrying a tray of food. Bread, cheese, some kind of roasted meat that smelled better than anything Nerissa had eaten in months. From the kitchen, the woman said, not meeting her eyes, I'm Marith. I'll be bringing your meals. Thank you, Marith. The woman lingered, clearly wanting to say something more. Finally, in a rushed whisper, be careful here, miss. The walls listen. And whatever you do, don't ask about the queen. She was gone before Nerissa could ask what she meant. The queen? She ate mechanically, her mind racing. There had been no mention of a queen. Not in the village gossip about the king, not from the king himself, not from Aldis. Yet Marith had spoken as if the queen's existence was common knowledge and common danger. Vorn made a soft sound, drawing her attention. He'd risen from his spot and was standing at the window, ears pricked forward, and body tense. What is it, boy? The beast didn't respond. But Nerissa felt it too, suddenly. A prickling at the back of her neck, the sense of being watched. She turned. A woman stood in the doorway. She was perhaps 30, with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that held a physician's sharpness. She wore the simple robes of a healer, but there was nothing simple about the way she looked at Nerissa. Recognition, anger, fear. So it's true, the woman said. He actually brought you here. Nerissa rose slowly. Do I know you? You should. The woman stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Though perhaps I've changed more than you have. The last time we met, I was barely more than an apprentice. And you were covered in your alpha's blood. The world tilted. No, it couldn't be. Tanith, Nerissa breathed. You remember. The healer's smile held no warmth. I wondered if you'd blocked it out. Some do, after trauma like that. After doing what you did. Tanith, I didn't... Save your lies for someone who didn't see the body. Tanith moved closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. I was there, Nerissa. I saw what was left of Alpha Corvain after you finished with him. I saw the wounds. I saw what kind of rage could cause damage like that. You don't understand what happened that night. I understand that you murdered your own Alpha. I understand that you vanished before you could face justice. And I understand that for 3 years everyone assumed you were dead. Tanith's eyes glittered. But here you are, in the king's castle, caring for his precious beast. Nerissa's hands trembled. Does the king know? Not yet. But he will. Tanith straightened, smoothing her robes. I've served this court for 2 years. I've earned trust, respect, a position. I won't let your presence destroy that. Then why warn me? Why not just tell him? Tanith paused, something complicated moving behind her eyes. Because I want to understand why you're here first. The king doesn't do anything without reason. If he brought you to this castle, he had a purpose. She moved toward the door. So I'm going to watch. And wait. And when I figure out his game, I'll decide whether your secret serves me better as leverage or as your execution warrant. She was almost to the door when she turned back, one final dagger to throw. Oh, and Nerissa? Don't think you can run. Don't think you can hide. I know what you are now. What you really are. Her smile was knife-sharp. And when this court discovers that the king's new pet is the woman who slaughtered her own alpha in cold blood, they'll demand justice. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? Tanith opened the door. Then tell me, if you're innocent, why did you run? Why did you hide? Why did you let everyone believe you were dead rather than face what you'd done? She left before Nerissa could answer. The door clicked shut with terrible finality. Nerissa stood frozen, her breath coming fast, her mind reeling. 3 years. 3 years of hiding, of building a new life, of convincing herself that the past was buried deep enough that it could never claw its way back. And now, in a single day, it had found her. Vorn pressed against her leg, a warm, solid weight. She sank to her knees and buried her hands in his dark fur, letting herself shake. I didn't kill him, she whispered to the beast. I swear to you, I didn't kill him. But even as she said it, the same doubt that had haunted her for 3 years crawled up from the depths of her memory. Because Tanith was right about one thing. Nerissa had been there that night. She had been covered in Alpha Corvain's blood, and she had no memory, none at all, of what had actually happened. The healers who'd examined her afterward said trauma could do that, could carve holes in the mind where unbearable things had been. But sometimes, in her darkest moments, Nerissa wondered if something else had stolen those hours from her. Something, or someone. Only the body, only the blood, only the screaming that might have been hers, or might have been his, or might have been something else entirely, something that still prowled the dark corners of her nightmares. Outside her window, the sun was setting over Valdrin. The shadows were growing long, and somewhere in this castle, a cold king kept secrets that might prove even darker than her own. A week passed before Nerissa understood that she was being watched by more than just Tanith. The servants spoke to her only when necessary, their eyes sliding away the moment she looked at them. The guards who patrolled the corridors acknowledged her existence with curt nods. Nothing more. Even Marith, who brought her meals 3 times a day, had stopped offering warnings after that first night. But Nerissa felt the attention anyway, subtle, constant, like the pressure before a storm. A letter had arrived from Briar Hollow on her 3rd day. Aldous had delivered it with clear distaste. The king's supplies had reached the village as promised. The children had food, medicine, warm blankets. Little Oswin's cough was clearing. For the first time in years, Briar Hollow wasn't starving. That knowledge kept her going through the isolation. She spent her days with Vorn. The beast seemed to crave her presence in a way that defied explanation. When she entered a room, his amber eyes would track her with something almost like relief. When she sat beside him, his massive body would curl around hers as if protecting her from threats only he could see. And when she spoke to him, rambling conversations about nothing and everything, the way she'd once talked to the children of Briar Hollow, his ears would swivel toward her voice, attentive, listening. You're supposed to be dying, she told him one afternoon, scratching behind his ears. You don't look like you're dying. Vorn made a low, rumbling sound that might have been agreement. What am I supposed to do? The king brought me here to save you, but he won't tell me what's wrong. Aldous won't tell me anything. The servants act like I'm carrying plague. She sighed. And somewhere in this castle there's a woman who wants to see me executed for a crime I'm not even sure I committed. The beast's head lifted. His amber eyes met hers with unsettling intensity. I didn't kill him. Nerissa whispered, the same words she'd repeated to herself 1,000 times. I couldn't have. I wouldn't. But the doubt remained. It always remained. A knock at her door shattered the moment. Aldous stood in the corridor, his expression even more pinched than usual. You're to attend the court gathering tonight, he announced. His Majesty's orders? Nerissa's stomach dropped. Court gathering? A formal event. Nobles from across Valdrin will be present. His Majesty wishes to introduce you. Introduce me as what? As the Keeper of Vorn. Aldous' lips thinned. There have been questions about why the king brought an unknown woman to the castle, about why his beast has bonded to her. Tonight, those questions will be addressed. And if I don't want to be paraded before the nobility? Aldous looked at her as if she'd suggested setting the castle on fire. The king's wishes are not requests. He produced a bundle of fabric from behind his back, a gown of deep forest green, finer than anything Nerissa had ever touched. Wear this. Be in the great hall by sunset. And for both our sakes, don't speak unless spoken to. He was gone before she could argue. The great hall was overwhelming. Nerissa had braced herself for grandeur, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. Vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow. Pillars carved with wolves and moons and symbols she didn't recognize. Hundreds of candles casting flickering light across silk gowns and jeweled throats and faces that turned toward her with naked curiosity. She felt like prey, walking into a den of predators. Vorn pressed against her side, his massive body a shield between her and the crowd. The nobles parted around them, not from courtesy, but from fear. Several women gasped. One man stumbled backwards so quickly he spilled wine across his companion's gown. By the gods, someone whispered loudly. It's true. The beast follows her. Follows her? Look at it. It's protecting her. What manner of witch is she? Nerissa kept her eyes forward, fighting the urge to turn and run. The green gown felt like armor now, but armor made of paper, easily torn. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, sat the Alpha King. Karis Vanthor looked every inch the ruler tonight. Black clothing trimmed with silver, a circlet of dark metal on his brow, those winter eyes surveying his court with absolute authority. When his gaze found Nerissa, it lingered. She couldn't read his expression. She suspected no one could. Approach, he said, and though his voice wasn't loud, it carried through the hall with the weight of command. The crowd parted further. Nerissa walked forward, Vorn at her side, aware of every whisper, every stare, and every speculation being filed away for later gossip. When she stopped at the base of the dais and curtsied, awkwardly, she was sure, having never needed to curtsy in Briar Hollow. Lords and ladies of Valdrin, the king announced, rising from his throne. This is Nerissa of Briar Hollow. She has been brought to this castle for a singular purpose, to care for Vorn. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Surely, Your Majesty, a man spoke up, older, portly, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being heard. A common village woman is not qualified for such a task. The royal beast is a symbol of the crown's power. Its care should be entrusted to someone of proper breeding. Proper breeding? The king's voice remained flat. Lord Havrick, your properly bred handlers have failed to earn Vorn's trust in 5 years of trying. He's bitten 3 of them, killed 1. Lord Havrick paled. Your Majesty, I only meant... Vorn chose her. The king descended from the dais, moving to stand beside Nerissa. The chill emanating from him was palpable. In 300 years of recorded history, no beast bonded to the Vanthor line has ever chosen anyone outside the royal bloodline. Until now. The silence that followed was deafening. This woman, the king continued, threw a stone at Vorn's head to protect a group of orphans. He brought it back to her like a loyal hound. That is why she is here. That is why she will remain. Are there any other questions? His tone made clear there had better not be, but someone spoke anyway. What of her background, Your Majesty? Tanith. The healer had emerged from the crowd, her autumn hair gleaming in the candlelight, her expression carefully innocent. We know nothing of this woman beyond what she's told us. Briar Hollow is a village for outcasts, for those who fled their pasts. Should we not investigate before placing her so close to the crown? Nerissa's blood turned to ice. The king's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Healer Tanith, you have concerns? Only the concerns any loyal subject would have, Your Majesty. Tanith's smile was poison wrapped in silk. After all, we know nothing of where she came from before Briar Hollow. Nothing of her family, her pack, her history. For all we know, she could be a criminal, an exile, perhaps even a... Vorn moved. One moment he was standing beside Nerissa. The next, he had crossed the distance to Tanith and stood before her, his massive head level with her chest, his amber eyes burning with unmistakable threat. The healer stumbled backward, all composure forgotten. The nobles nearest to her scattered like startled birds. Vorn didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth. He simply stood there, radiating menace so pure it needed no sound. It seems, the king said quietly, that Vorn has concerns of his own. He moved to stand beside the beast, one hand coming to rest on Vorn's head. He's very protective of his new keeper. I would advise caution in how you speak of her, Healer Tanith. Vorn's judgment is final. Tanith's face had gone white. Of course, Your Majesty. I meant no offense. I'm sure you didn't. The king turned back to the assembled nobles, dismissing Tanith as if she'd never spoken. The introduction is complete. Enjoy the evening's festivities. It was a clear dismissal. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming in hushed, excited tones. Nerissa felt the weight of 100 glances on her back as she stood frozen, Vorn returning to her side as if nothing had happened. The king's voice came low, meant only for her ears. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. She followed him out of the great hall, through a side door, into a corridor mercifully empty of watching eyes. Vorn padded silently behind them. When they were alone, the king stopped. The healer, he said. You know her. It wasn't a question. Nerissa's throat tightened. Don't lie to me. Those pale eyes, cold as frost, fixed on hers. Vorn doesn't threaten without reason. He sensed your fear when she spoke. Your anger. Your... He paused, searching for the word. Guilt. The silence stretched between them. Everyone has a past, Your Majesty, Nerissa finally said. You told me not to ask about yours. He and I would ask the same courtesy. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant respect. Fair enough. He began walking again. But understand this. Whatever secrets you carry, they are yours to keep only as long as they pose no threat to this castle. The moment they become my concern, I will have answers. Willingly, given or otherwise. He left her standing in the empty corridor, his footsteps fading into shadow. Nerissa leaned against the cold stone wall, her pulse racing. Vorn pressed against her, a warm anchor in the darkness. You protected me, she whispered to the beast. Why? Those amber eyes held hers, and for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw something ancient behind them. Something that knew far more than it should. Something waiting. Sleep wouldn't come. Nerissa lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling and the events of the evening playing on an endless loop in her mind. The court's whispers, Tanith's veiled accusations, the king's warning, Vorn's inexplicable defense of her. And beneath it all, the same question that had haunted her for 3 years. What really happened that night? She remembered fragments, Corvain's voice, sharp with accusation, the taste of blood in her mouth. Heat, terrible, searing heat. And then nothing. Just the aftermath. Just the body of her alpha, torn apart by something savage, and her own hands coated in crimson. She'd run. That was the only part that made sense. She'd run because staying meant death, and even if she deserved death, some animal instinct had refused to let her accept it. But had she killed him? In rage, in fear, in some moment of madness she couldn't remember. And or had something else happened in that darkness? A soft whine pulled her from her thoughts. Vorn stood at her door, which she could have sworn she'd closed, his massive body tense with some unspoken urgency. "What is it, boy?" The beast turned and padded into the corridor. Against every instruction she'd been given, Nerissa followed. The castle at night was a different creature than the castle by day. Shadows pooled in corners. Torches flickered with inadequate light. Every sound echoed strangely, footsteps multiplying until it seemed 100 people walked beside her instead of just a massive wolf beast. Vorn led her through corridors she didn't recognize, down a staircase she hadn't known existed, until they emerged into open air. A garden. Nerissa stopped, her breath catching. Moonlight flooded the enclosed space, turning it silver and strange. A fountain burbled at its center, the water catching light like liquid mercury. Around it grew flowers that seemed to glow in the darkness, pale blooms she had no name for, their petals luminescent against the night. And sitting on the fountain's edge, his bare feet trailing in the water, was the king. He hadn't seen her yet. His head was bowed, his dark hair falling forward to shadow his face, and in the moonlight, stripped of ceremony and crown and the armor of command, he looked almost vulnerable. Nerissa started to retreat. This was private. She shouldn't be here. But Vorn had other ideas. The beast bounded forward with a joy she'd never seen from him, crossing the garden in 3 massive strides and pressing his head against the king's chest with a sound that was almost a purr. The king's hands came up automatically, burying themselves in dark fur. "You're supposed to be resting," he murmured. Then his eyes lifted and found Nerissa frozen at the garden's entrance. Neither of them moved. "I'm sorry," Nerissa blurted. "Vorn led me here. I didn't mean to intrude. He brought you intentionally." The king's voice held no accusation, only weariness. "He does that sometimes. Brings me things he thinks I need." Nerissa wasn't sure how to respond to being categorized as something the beast thought the king needed. "You should go back to bed," Karis said. But he didn't sound like he meant it, and his hands hadn't stopped moving through Vorn's fur, the gesture almost desperate in its tenderness. Nerissa found herself walking forward instead of retreating, and the flagstones were cool beneath her bare feet. She hadn't thought to put on shoes, and the night air carried the scent of those strange, glowing flowers. She stopped a few paces from the fountain. "You couldn't sleep either." "I rarely sleep." A pause. "It invites dreams." "Bad ones?" He didn't answer, but the tightening of his jaw told her enough. Nerissa sat on the fountain's edge, not too close, but close enough. The water was warmer than she expected, heated by some mechanism she couldn't see. "The flowers," she said, because the silence felt too heavy. "I've never seen anything like them. Moonblooms. They only grow in darkness. They die in sunlight." His voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. "My mother planted this garden when I was a child. She said some beautiful things could only exist in shadow. She sounds wise. She's dead." Nerissa flinched. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." But something in his tone suggested that time hadn't softened the loss at all. They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sounds the fountain's gentle burble and Vorn's contented breathing. "You're cold," Nerissa said suddenly. The king's head turned toward her. "What?" "In the great hall, when you stood next to me, I felt it. And now," She gestured at his bare feet in the water, at his thin sleeping shirt. It's barely above freezing tonight, but you're not shivering. You're not even uncomfortable. His expression shuddered. I run cold. A family trait. Wolves don't run cold. Alphas especially. We're made of heat. She studied him. Really studied him, noting the pallor of his skin, the way the moonlight seemed to pass through him rather than illuminate him. What's wrong with you? The question came out before she could stop it. The king stood, water dripping from his feet. We're done here. Your Majesty. I said we're done. His voice cracked like ice breaking, and for just a moment Nerissa saw something beneath the cold control, pain, ancient and unhealed. Go back to your room. Forget you saw this garden. Forget you saw me. He was already walking away, Vorn rising to follow. Karis. The name stopped him. She hadn't meant to use it, hadn't even known she'd remembered it. But he turned, and his expression was no longer angry. He looked haunted. Whatever it is, Nerissa said quietly, you don't have to carry it alone. For 3 heartbeats he simply stared at her. Then something shifted in those winter eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but something equally terrifying. Recognition. Of what? She didn't know. You shouldn't say things like that, he said finally. Not to me. Why not? But he was already gone, swallowed by the shadows, Vorn trailing reluctantly behind. Nerissa sat alone in the moonlit garden, surrounded by flowers that could only bloom in darkness, and tried to understand why her blood was rushing through her veins like wildfire. She wasn't falling for him. She couldn't be. He was cold, distant, and dangerous. He'd warned her explicitly not to care. But when he'd looked at her just now, when he'd heard his own name in her voice, she'd seen something human beneath the ice. Something wounded. Something that wanted desperately to be reached. And despite every instinct screaming at her to run, Nerissa found herself wanting to reach back. 3 weeks. That's how long Nerissa had been in the castle, though it felt like both longer and shorter. Longer because her old life in Briar Hollow seemed impossibly distant now, a memory belonging to someone else. Shorter because each day blurred into the next with a rhythm she was only beginning to understand. She spent her mornings with Vorn. The beast had become her constant companion, her shadow, her strange and silent friend. She walked with him through the castle grounds, fed him from her own hands, brushed the dirt and leaves from his dark fur. The servants had stopped being quite so afraid of her, though they still gave Vorn a wide berth. And slowly, impossibly, the beast seemed to be better. Not healed. Nerissa wasn't foolish enough to believe that. But there was more life in his amber eyes, more spring in his massive stride. The castle's other healers had noticed it too. She'd heard them whispering in corridors, debating what had changed. The king had noticed as well. That was the strangest part. Despite his warnings, despite his explicit commands to remain separate, Karis had begun appearing. Not obviously. Never obviously. He was too controlled for that. But she would be reading in the library, and he would arrive with documents that apparently needed to be reviewed in that exact corner. She would be walking Vorn through the gardens, and he would be there, inspecting some plant or another, acknowledging her with a curt nod that somehow lasted longer than it should. They didn't speak of the night in the moonlight garden. But it hung between them, unacknowledged, like a door that had been opened a crack and refused to fully close. Today, Nerissa had taken Vorn to the kennels to play with the hunting hounds, a suggestion from one of the braver servants, who'd mentioned that Vorn used to enjoy their company before he'd become the way he is now. She was sitting on an overturned barrel, watching the beast chase a ball that 3 hounds were too terrified to pursue, when footsteps announced she wasn't alone. He's playing. The king stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable as always. But there was something in his voice. Wonder, perhaps, or the ghost of it. He seems happier, Nerissa agreed. Is that Unusual? Vorn hasn't played in years. He's been. Karis hesitated, searching for words. Fading, growing weaker by the day. But since you arrived? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Nerissa looked at the beast. This massive, terrifying creature who brought her stones and pressed against her when she was sad, and protected her from threats she didn't fully understand. What exactly is wrong with him? She asked. And don't tell me it's a family condition. I've been here 3 weeks, and that answer has never made sense. Karis was quiet for a long moment. Then, to her shock, he sat down on the barrel beside her. Not touching. There was still a careful distance between them, but closer than he'd allowed himself before. Vorn is bound to me, he said finally. A blood bond, made when I was 7 years old. His life force is tied to mine. When I am strong, he is strong. When you what? He turned to look at her, and for the first time, his guard was truly down. She could see the exhaustion etched into his features, the shadows beneath his eyes, the pallor that went beyond running cold. I'm dying, he said simply, and Vorn is dying with me. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? There's a curse. On my bloodline. On me. Specifically. Because I'm the last. His voice remained flat, factual, as if discussing someone else's death. My grandfather spent 40 years searching for a cure. My father spent 30. I've spent every day since I was 15. How long do you have? I don't know. A year. Perhaps 2. Perhaps less. He looked away, toward Vorn, who had abandoned the ball and was watching them with those 2 knowing eyes. Vorn knows. He's known since the beginning. That's why he's been fading. He can feel me slipping away. But if he's doing better now? You're not curing me, Karis said quickly. Whatever gift you have, it's easing his symptoms, not addressing the cause. The bond means he feels what I feel. Your presence comforts him. That's all. That's all. As if comfort meant nothing. As if being a balm to a dying creature's pain was a small thing. What is the curse? Nerissa asked. Maybe if I understood. No. The word was sharp. Final. I've told you more than I should have. More than I've told anyone who isn't bound by oath to keep my secrets. Then why tell me? He stood, putting distance between them again. When he turned back, his walls were rising, ice reforming over the cracks she'd glimpsed. Because you asked, he said. And for some reason I can't explain. And I wanted you to know. He left her sitting among the hounds, Vorn padding over to press against her legs, and Nerissa realized that her hands were shaking. He was dying. This cold, complicated, carefully guarded man was dying, and she couldn't. She couldn't what? Save him? She didn't know how. She didn't even know what the curse was. Stop caring? Too late for that. Far too late. Somewhere in the last 3 weeks, between the stone she'd thrown and this moment, something had shifted. The ice around her heart. The protective shell she'd built after fleeing Corvain's pack, after the blood and the blackout and the running, had begun to crack, and the man who'd warned her not to care was the one who'd broken through. I'm falling in love with him, she whispered to Vorn, the words terrifying in their truth. That's the stupidest thing I could possibly do. The beast made a sound that might have been agreement. That night, Nerissa couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. I'm dying. The casual way he'd spoken, as if his own death was merely an inconvenience, the resignation in his voice. She paced her chambers, Vorn watching her from his usual spot by the fire. There had to be something she could do, some way to help. If her gift eased Vorn's suffering, perhaps it could. A sound stopped her mid-stride. It came from beyond her window, a distant howl, but not like any wolf she'd ever heard. It was wrong somehow, broken, full of pain that went beyond the physical. Vorn's head lifted, ears pricking forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Nerissa moved to the window and looked out into the darkness. The East Tower. And she could see it from here. That forbidden spire she'd been warned never to approach. And at its peak, in a window she could barely make out, a light flickered. The howl came again. Closer this time, or perhaps just louder. And then she saw it. A figure in the window. Just a silhouette, barely visible against the candlelight behind it. But the shape was wrong. Not quite human. Not quite wolf. Something in between. Something suffering. The figure moved, pressing against the glass, and for one heart-stopping moment Nerissa could have sworn it was looking directly at her. Then the light went out, and the tower was swallowed by darkness. Nerissa stood frozen, her breath coming in shallow gasps, her mind racing. What you cannot see. Never enter the East Tower. Don't speak of the Queen. The warnings crashed together in her mind, forming a picture she couldn't quite resolve. The king was hiding something. Something more than his curse, something more than his impending death. Something in that tower that howled in the night like it was being torn apart from the inside. And whatever it was, Nerissa realized with growing horror, it had seen her too. She waited 3 nights before her resolve broke. 3 nights of lying awake, listening for that broken howl. 3 nights of watching the East Tower from her window, searching for the flickering light, the wrong-shaped silhouette. 3 nights of telling herself that the king's secrets were none of her concern. On the 4th night, Nerissa stopped pretending. She waited until the castle had gone quiet, until even the guards' footsteps had faded to distant echoes. Then she slipped from her chambers, Vorn padding silently at her side. The beast knew where she was going. She could feel his tension, the way his muscles coiled beneath his fur. But he didn't try to stop her. If anything, he seemed to be leading. The East Tower was older than the rest of the castle. She could see that now, up close. The stones were darker, weathered in ways the other walls weren't. Moss grew thick in the cracks, and the door at its base was not locked with any ordinary mechanism. Chains. Heavy iron chains wrapped around the handle and bolted to the stone. Not to keep people out, Nerissa realized with dawning horror, to keep something in. Vorn, she whispered. What is this place? The beast pressed against her, that low whine building in his throat again. His amber eyes fixed on the door with something she'd never seen from him before. Grief. You know what's in there, don't you? You've always known. Vorn's massive head bowed. Nerissa's hands went to the chains. They were cold. Supernaturally cold. The same chill that radiated from the king. And as she touched them, she felt something else. A pulse. Faint. Rhythmic. Like a heartbeat trapped in iron. Magic. Old magic. The kind that predated kingdoms and laws and everything civilized. I can't let you do this. She spun. The king stood at the corridor's end, still dressed in his evening clothes, his face carved from shadow and moonlight. How long have you been following me? Nerissa demanded. Since you left your room. He moved closer, each step measured, controlled. I told you never to come here. You told me many things. You also told me you were dying, and then walked away, like it meant nothing. Something flickered in his winter eyes. It means everything. That's why you can't be here. What's in the tower, Carries? Don't. What's in the tower? His jaw clenched. The frost in the air around him intensified until Nerissa could see her own breath misting between them. My mother, he said finally. The words hung there, impossible. His mother. Dead, he'd told her. Dead for a long time. You said she? I said what I needed you to believe. He moved past her, pressing his palm against the chains. They seemed to recognize him, the iron warming slightly at his touch. She's not dead. She's changed. The curse took her mind first, then her body. By the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, she was already gone. What's left? His voice cracked, just barely. What's left is not the woman who raised me. Nerissa felt her heart shatter. All this time, all his cold distance, his walls, his warnings, he'd been carrying this alone. The curse transforms those of your bloodline, she said slowly, piecing it together. That's what's happening to you. That's why you're so cold. The cold comes first, then the emptiness, then the hunger for something that can never be satisfied. He turned to face her, and in the moonlight she could see traces of what he would become, the pallor deepening, the shadows under his eyes like bruises. My grandfather lasted until 50. My father until 43. I've already outlived them both. Every day is borrowed time. There has to be a way to break it. There isn't. Trust me. And I've spent my entire life searching. Then why did you bring me here? The question burst out of her, raw with frustration. Why Vorn? Why any of this if you've already given up? I haven't given up on Vorn. His voice softened. When I'm gone, he'll need someone he trusts, someone who can... I don't want to be Vorn's keeper after you're dead. The words echoed through the corridor, too loud, too honest. I don't want you to die at all. Silence. Karis stared at her as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. You barely know me, he said quietly. I know enough. Nerissa stepped closer, ignoring every warning screaming in her mind. I know you visit Vorn when you think no one's watching. I know you send double rations to Briar Hollow even though our agreement only required basic supplies. I know you sat with me in a garden full of flowers that only bloom in darkness and told me about your mother because you wanted me to understand, even when you couldn't explain why. Nerissa, I know you're kind, Karis. Underneath all the ice, and the distance, and the walls you've built. And I know, her voice broke. I know I'm falling in love with you, which is the most foolish thing I've ever done in a life full of foolish choices. He moved so fast she barely saw it. One moment there was distance between them. The next, his hands were cupping her face, his forehead pressed to hers, his breath cold against her lips. Don't, he whispered, and the word was agony. Please don't. Too late. You don't understand. The curse. It's not just transformation. It's isolation. Anyone I love? Is anyone who loves me? I don't care. You should. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, the touch reverent and desperate. You should run as far from me as you can. You should forget you ever threw that stone. I can't. Nerissa. She kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was 3 weeks of tension and longing and impossible hope crashing together like waves against stone. His lips were cold, but they warmed against hers. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and for one perfect moment there was no curse, no dying, and no secrets. Just them. Then Karis made a sound, pain, not pleasure, and wrenched himself away. His hand flew to his chest. His face went white. Karis? He stumbled backward, catching himself against the wall. Frost was spreading across the stones where his palm touched, in crackling outward in delicate, deadly patterns. It's starting, he gasped. I tried to tell you. The curse. It feeds on love. Every time I feel it, every time someone feels it for me. He doubled over, a groan tearing from his throat. And Nerissa watched in horror as frost began to spread across his skin. She caught him before he could fall. His body was freezing against hers, cold seeping through her clothes, into her skin, down to her bones. But she didn't let go. She couldn't let go. Karis, stay with me. Stay with me. His eyes found hers, already glazing with pain. I tried to warn you, he whispered. The curse takes everyone I care for. everyone who cares for me. It feeds on the feeling, grows stronger with every... He convulsed, the words cutting off. Nerissa dragged him toward the wall, lowering him to the ground, and her hands pressed against his chest, feeling the cold spreading beneath his shirt like a living thing. Then stop feeling it, she demanded. Push me away, hate me. Whatever you have to do, I can't. The words came out broken, half laughing and half sobbing. Don't you understand? I've spent my entire life not feeling, keeping everyone at distance, refusing to let anyone close enough to trigger the curse. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. And then, you threw a stone at my beast, and I felt something for the first time in years. Something I couldn't control. Karis, I should have sent you away. The moment Vorn brought that stone to your feet, I should have known. His grip tightened. But I was selfish. I wanted to see what it felt like. To care about someone. To be cared for. Tears were streaming down Nerissa's face, freezing on her cheeks as they fell. This isn't your fault. Yes, it is. All of it. You, Vorn. Everyone who's suffered because I couldn't accept my fate. He coughed, and frost glittered on his lips. At least when I'm gone, the curse dies with me. No more heirs. No more transformation. It ends. I won't let you die. You can't stop it. His eyes were drifting closed. No one can. It's been tried. My father tried. My grandfather. They all loved someone eventually, and the curse took them. Nerissa's mind raced. There had to be something. Some piece of information she was missing. Some key she hadn't found. The curse feeds on love. It kills those who feel it, transforms them, and destroys them. But why? Curses didn't exist without reason. Someone had created this. Someone had wanted the Vanthor line to suffer. Who made the curse? She demanded. Who did this to your family? A witch, Karis murmured, his voice fading. Centuries ago. A Vanthor king wronged her. She cursed his bloodline, ensured none of us would ever know. His eyes closed. Karis. Nerissa shook him, but he didn't respond. His chest still rose and fell, but barely. The frost had spread from his heart outward, covering his torso, creeping up his throat. She had hours, maybe less. Vorn pressed against her, whining. The beast's amber eyes met hers, and in them she saw the same desperation she felt. Save him, those eyes seemed to say. Whatever it takes. Save him. Nerissa stood on shaking legs. She couldn't carry Karis, but she could find help. She could... Well, this is quite the scene. She spun. Tanith stood at the corridor's end, flanked by two guards who looked deeply uncomfortable. The healer's expression was unreadable in the torchlight. Get away from us, Nerissa snarled. Why? So you can watch him die alone? Tanith moved closer, her eyes fixed on the king's frost-covered form. The curse is accelerating. You must have done something to trigger it. A confession, perhaps? A kiss? Nerissa's hands curled into fists. If you're here to gloat, I'm here because I've been watching that tower for weeks, waiting for you to do something foolish. Tanith knelt beside the king, pressing 2 fingers to his throat. Still alive. Barely. He has perhaps 3 hours before the transformation becomes irreversible. Transformation into what? What do you think lives in that tower, girl? Tanith's eyes met hers. What do you think his mother became? Horror flooded through Nerissa. No. The curse doesn't just kill. It changes. Every Vanthor who's loved and been loved becomes a creature of ice and hunger, trapped between human and beast. The king's mother has been in that tower for 15 years. If we don't stop this, he'll join her. Nerissa's mind latched onto the one word that mattered. We? Tanith was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, conflicted. I've been lying to you about many things. She stood, brushing off her robes. I didn't come to this castle as a simple healer. I came to watch, to wait, to see if the curse could truly be broken. Why would you care about breaking it? Because my grandmother created it. The ground seemed to drop beneath her feet. 300 years ago, Wadia Vanther King seduced her, promised her marriage, then cast her aside when she became pregnant with his bastard. She cursed his bloodline in retaliation, ensured that none of his descendants would ever know love without suffering for it. Tanith's jaw tightened. What she didn't realize was that curses have consequences. The magic bound her bloodline to theirs. Every generation, one of her descendants is drawn to the Vanthors, pulled toward them, unable to resist. You're descended from the witch. Yes, and I've spent my entire life studying her work, trying to understand it, trying to find a way to end what she started. Her eyes flickered with something almost like shame. I didn't tell you the truth about Alpha Corvain because I needed you afraid, needed you compliant. But the king is dying, and if I don't act now, in everything I've worked for dies with him. Nerissa's blood ran cold. What didn't you tell me about Corvain? You didn't kill him, Nerissa. Tanith's voice was flat. I did. The words hit like a physical blow. What? Corvain was researching the Vanthor curse. His grandmother had been a Vanthor, a bastard branch, hidden and forgotten, but the blood was there. He'd found something, a clue to breaking the curse that haunted his own lineage. Tanith's gaze dropped. I couldn't let him be the one to break it. My grandmother created this curse. If anyone was going to end it, it had to be me, her descendant. On my terms, in my way. Corvain would have bungled it, broken it wrong, and the backlash could have killed dozens. So you killed him instead, and let me think I'd done it. I needed you broken, afraid, easy to manipulate if I ever needed you. Tanith's voice held no apology. But I also know how the curse can be broken. I've always known. Then why haven't you? Because breaking it requires sacrifice, not death, something harder. The cursed one must accept love fully, without reservation. Must believe they deserve it. Tanith's gaze moved to Karis's frozen form. Every Vanthor who's ever loved has done so with guilt. With the knowledge that their feeling would hurt someone. That guilt feeds the curse, makes it stronger. He has to believe he deserves to be loved, Nerissa whispered. Yes, and in 300 years, not a single Vanthor has managed it. They all believed they were poison. They all held back some part of themselves. Tanith met her eyes. But you. He told you everything. He let you see the tower. His mother. His curse. He's never done that before. Never trusted anyone that completely. Hope flickered in Nerissa's chest. Then there's a chance. A small one, but yes. Tanith gestured to the guards. Help me move him. We need to take him to the tower, to his mother. If there's any part of him that still believes in redemption, she's the key to finding it. Nerissa's mind was still reeling. But why me? Why did Vorn choose me specifically? Tanith studied her for a long moment. Your gift with animals? You think it's natural, don't you? An accident of birth? She shook her head slowly. It's not. It's magic, Nerissa. Old magic. The kind that existed before witches learned to shape it. You resonate with cursed creatures because you carry the same frequency as the curse itself. You're a living antidote. And Vorn sensed it the moment you stood your ground against him. The East Tower was colder than anywhere Nerissa had ever been. They carried Karis up the winding stairs, his body growing heavier with each step as the frost spread. By the time they reached the top, ice crystals had formed in his hair, on his eyelashes, across his pale lips. The chamber at the tower's peak was both prison and sanctuary. Thick chains hung from the walls, some broken, some still intact. Frost covered every surface, the floor, the ceiling, the narrow window that looked out over the kingdom. And in the corner, curled into herself like a wounded animal, was the queen. She had been beautiful once. Nerissa could see it in the bones of her face, the elegant length of her fingers. But the curse had transformed her into something between woman and beast, pale fur sprouting from her arms, her eyes the same amber as Vorn's, her mouth filled with teeth too sharp for any human. When they entered, she lifted her head and made a sound that might have been a word. Karis. The king didn't respond. Couldn't respond. The frost had reached his face now, creeping across his cheeks like a death mask being formed in real time. Put him down, Tanith ordered, in front of her. She needs to see him. The guards obeyed, laying the king at his mother's feet. The queen, the creature that had been the queen, crawled forward, her clawed hands reaching for her son's face. So cold, she whispered. My boy. So cold. Tears froze on Nerissa's cheeks. This was what awaited Karis. This half-existence, this endless winter of body and soul. And unless she could reach him. She knelt beside him, taking his frozen hand in hers. Karis, Karis, can you hear me? Nothing. Not even a flicker of response. He's too far gone, one of the guards muttered. We should prepare the chains. No! Nerissa's voice cracked through the chamber. He's not gone. He's in there somewhere, and I'm going to find him. She closed her eyes, reaching for that strange gift that had always lived inside her. The thing that made animals trust her, that had drawn Vorn to her side, that let her sense the pain and fear and hope of creatures who couldn't speak. Karis, she thought, pushing the name into the darkness. I know you can hear me. I know you're fighting. Cold. Endless cold. A void that seemed to swallow everything. You told me not to love you. You said it would be dangerous. But you never asked me not to. Deeper. Past the ice. Past the emptiness. Searching for the warmth she knew existed. You showed me your mother. Your curse. Your dying beast. You showed me everything. And you didn't have to. You could have kept your distance. Stayed safe behind your walls. But you didn't. There. A flicker. Faint, but real. You let me in because you wanted to be known. You wanted someone to see you. Not the king, not the curse. Just you. And I did. I do. I see you, Karis. The flicker grew stronger. She could feel him now. His presence. His essence. Buried beneath layers of ice and self-hatred and 300 years of inherited despair. You think you don't deserve love. You think caring about someone makes you a monster. But the only monster here is the curse itself. And curses can be broken. She felt his response. Not words, but emotion, disbelief, longing, fear. I'm not afraid of you, she told him. I'm not afraid of what you might become. Because I know who you are. You're the man who sends extra supplies to orphans, who sits with his beast in moonlit gardens, who carries his mother's madness alone because he can't bear to let anyone else share the burden. The ice around his heart was cracking. She could feel it, fissures spreading through the cold, warmth bleeding through. You deserve to be loved, Karis, not despite what you are, but because of it. And I'm going to keep telling you that until you believe it. Nerissa. His voice. Weak. Fractured. But his voice. She opened her eyes. The frost had stopped spreading. His eyes were open, fixed on hers, filled with something she'd never seen from him before. Wonder. Hope. Love. Unfettered and unashamed. I believe you, he whispered. The curse exploded outward, shattering like ice struck by lightning. Crystals caught the moonlight like 1,000 tiny stars. The cold that had filled the chamber vanished, replaced by warmth that seemed to radiate from Karis himself. And in the corner, the queen screamed. But it wasn't a scream of pain. It was release. 300 years of suffering, of transformation, of being trapped between forms. all of it breaking apart as the curse unwound. The fur receded, the claws softened, the sharp teeth dulled, and slowly, impossibly, the monster became a woman again. She lay gasping on the floor, aged and frail but human. Fully, completely human. Mother. Karis struggled to his feet, Nerissa helping him, and crossed to kneel beside the woman who had birthed him. Mother. Can you hear me? Karis. Her voice was rusty with disuse but clear. My son. My beautiful boy. Tears streamed down her weathered face. You broke it. You finally broke it. Not me. He looked back at Nerissa, and his expression made her breath catch. Her. She found me in the dark. She refused to let me go. Tanith stood in the doorway, her face unreadable. It's done then. The curse is broken. Yes. Karis rose, keeping his mother's hand in his. And you have much to answer for, healer, starting with the murder of Alpha Corvain. The guards shifted, hands going to their weapons. Tanith didn't run, didn't fight. She simply nodded, as if she'd always known this moment would come. I'll tell you everything, she said quietly. Every secret my grandmother kept, every piece of research I've gathered. It's the least I owe you. Her eyes found Nerissa's, and her. For what I let her believe about herself. They led Tanith away in chains, and in the tower that had been a prison for so long, Nerissa stood with the man she loved, watching the first rays of dawn break over the kingdom. 3 months later, Briar Hollow had a new name. The king, no longer cold, no longer cursed, had decreed that the forgotten village would be rebuilt, renamed, transformed into a sanctuary for those the world had discarded. They called it Stonehaven now, because of the stone that had started everything. Nerissa stood at the center of the village square, watching the construction crews work. New buildings were rising where crumbling shacks had stood. A proper school, a healing house, homes with thick walls and warm hearths, and the orphan house, rebuilt 3 times its original size, with room for every abandoned child in the kingdom. You're crying again. She turned to find Karis watching her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He looked different now. Color in his cheeks, warmth in his eyes, none of the haunted pallor that had marked him before. I'm not crying, she lied, wiping her cheeks. It's the dust from the construction. Of course. He moved to stand beside her, his arm coming around her waist in a gesture so natural it stole her breath. The dust that only affects your eyes when you're looking at happy children. It's a very specific type of dust. Clearly. They watched in comfortable silence as Brecken, healthy now, thriving, led a group of younger children in some complicated game involving sticks and pine cones. Vorn lay nearby, serving as an obstacle that the children had to climb over, his tail wagging every time one of them tumbled across his massive back. The beast had changed too. The shadow of death had lifted from him, leaving behind an animal who seemed determined to make up for years of joyless existence by playing with every child he could find. Tanith's trial concluded yesterday, Karis said quietly. Nerissa nodded. I heard. She'll spend the rest of her life in service to the crown, cataloging her grandmother's research, finding ways to undo the harm that was done. He paused. It's not the execution many called for. Is that what you wanted? Execution? I wanted justice. But I've learned that justice isn't always about punishment. His arm tightened around her. Sometimes it's about transformation, about taking something broken and finding a way to make it useful. Nerissa thought of herself 3 years ago, running, terrified, convinced she was a monster. Thought of the woman she'd become, the woman who'd faced down a king's curse and won. Your mother is doing better, she said. She is. The healers say she'll make a full recovery, though it will take time. His voice softened. She asked about you. Wants to thank you properly. She doesn't need to thank me. Try telling her that. He turned her to face him, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. Try telling anyone in this kingdom that the woman who broke the Vanther curse doesn't deserve gratitude. Nerissa felt her cheeks flush. I didn't do it alone. No. You did it with stubborn determination, an absolute refusal to let me die, and a well-thrown stone. His smile grew. Speaking of which, I have something for you. He reached into his pocket and produced a small box. Inside, resting on velvet, was a ring. But not just any ring. The band was made of dark iron, and set into it was a stone. Small, rough-edged, unremarkable. The stone she'd thrown at Vorn. You kept it, she breathed. Vorn kept it. He brought it to me the night you arrived and refused to take it back. Karis lifted the ring, holding it between them. I had it set into iron from the chains that bound my mother's tower, a reminder that even the heaviest bonds can be broken. Nerissa couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I know I said I would never love you, Karis continued, his voice rough. I know I warned you away, told you caring would be dangerous, but I was wrong. Caring for you was the least dangerous thing I've ever done. And it was the thing that saved me. Karis. Marry me, Nerissa. The words came out sure and strong. Not because the kingdom expects it, not because you saved my life, but because I cannot imagine facing another sunrise without you beside me. Marry me, and let me spend the rest of my very long, curse-free life proving that you made the right choice when you threw that stone. She kissed him instead of answering. The children cheered. Vorn howled in what could only be described as approval. Somewhere in the crowd that had gathered, when had a crowd gathered? Someone started applauding. When they finally broke apart, Nerissa was laughing and crying, and happier than she'd ever been in her life. Is that a yes? Karis asked, slightly breathless. That's a yes. She took the ring from his fingers and slipped it onto her own hand. And the stone caught the light, unremarkable and perfect. But I have one condition. Name it. No more secrets, no more locked towers or forbidden questions. Whatever we face together. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Together, he agreed, always. The wedding was held in the moonlight garden, surrounded by flowers that bloomed only in darkness. The queen, restored, recovering, radiant with joy, sat in the place of honor, her frail hand clasped in that of a nurse who had become a friend during her long rehabilitation. Vorn served as ring-bearer, carrying the bands in a pouch around his massive neck. The children of Stonehaven threw petals that had been specially gathered from every corner of the kingdom. And as Nerissa walked toward the man who had once been made of ice, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. A stone thrown in desperation, a beast who saw something worth protecting. A king who learned that the curse he feared was nothing compared to the love he'd denied himself. They had both been hiding, both running from pasts that seemed impossible to escape. And yet, somehow, they had found each other. They had found freedom. I love you, Karis murmured as she reached him. I know, Nerissa smiled. I love you too. The officiant began the ceremony, but Nerissa barely heard the words. She was too busy memorizing Karis, the warmth that now lived in his eyes, the flush of color in cheeks that had once been pale as death, the way his hands trembled slightly as they held hers. They had saved each other, not through magic or destiny or ancient prophecy, but through something far more powerful, through choosing to love, even when it was terrifying, through refusing to let go, even when the darkness closed in, through believing, against all evidence, that they deserved to be happy. And as Karis kissed his bride under a canopy of moonblooms, as Vorn howled at the stars and the children laughed and the queen wept with joy, Nerissa understood something with perfect clarity. The stone she'd thrown had been small. insignificant, the kind of thing most people would overlook. But sometimes, the smallest things changed everything. Sometimes, a single act of courage could break a curse that had lasted centuries, and sometimes, two broken people could find in each other the very thing that made them whole.